The dry, cutting wind howled through the canyon walls, making the ropes groan under the strain. Boone Lancaster watched, his expression unreadable, as the horse dangled in midair, trapped in the cruel snare he had set. The animal thrashed, its hooves kicking at nothing, its wide, terrified eyes reflecting the blazing desert sun. Its desperate whinny echoed through the gorge, a cry swallowed by the vast emptiness around it. But to Boone, that sound meant nothing. He pulled a cigar from his inner pocket, struck a match with deliberate ease, and exhaled a cloud of smoke into the wind, his gaze never leaving the doomed creature. The horse was a burden, a mistake, a nuisance that needed to disappear. Dressed in a pristine linen suit and polished leather boots, Boone looked out of place in the harsh, unforgiving landscape. But nothing in his demeanor suggested hesitation. He had made his decision. And when Boone Lancaster made a decision, it was final. The ropes creaked, tightening around the horse's body, leaving deep impressions in its coat. The tension in the air was suffocating, each sway of the animal bringing it closer to its inevitable fate. Yet, for some reason, the horse refused to surrender. There was something in its eyes, something that unsettled Boone in a way he couldn't quite place. Defiance. A flicker of resilience. But it didn't matter. The canyon had no mercy for anyone. Boone stepped back, tapping the ashes off his cigar with a practiced flick. This had gone on long enough. He wasn't a man known for his patience. Turning on his heel, he started to walk away, confident that sooner or later, the weight of fate itself would drag the animal to its death. But then, a different sound tore through the air. A crack. A faint tremor beneath his feet. He froze. His sharp eyes darted upward. A fracture was forming along the rock face, thin as a hairline but spreading fast. Before he could react, a massive slab of stone broke loose from the cliff's edge. The thunderous crash shook the ground, sending dust billowing through the canyon. Boone turned just in time to see the ropes snap. Fate was shifting before his very eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one in control. For a brief moment, time seemed to stretch, bending under the weight of fate. The thick ropes, once so tight and unyielding, unraveled in a slow-motion horror. The horse, caught in midair, hung for the fraction of a second before gravity took hold. Its body plummeted downward, hooves flailing, its desperate cry piercing the canyon like a dagger to the chest. Boone Lancaster watched, frozen, as the creature tumbled toward what should have been certain death. Dust and shards of rock rained from above as the boulder's impact sent shockwaves through the gorge. The ledge where Boone stood trembled slightly, but his stance remained firm. He had spent a lifetime defying nature, bending the world to his will. Yet, in that instant, as he gazed down into the swirling chaos below, something unfamiliar gripped his chest. Not regret. Not guilt. Boone Lancaster did not entertain such trivial emotions. But unease. Something was wrong. The sound of impact never came. No sickening crunch of bone against stone. No final, agonizing wail. Boone narrowed his eyes, stepping cautiously to the edge, peering through the dust cloud. The canyon floor was hundreds of feet below. Nothing survived a drop like that. And yet, amid the swirling debris, he spotted movement. A shadow shifting, writhing. The impossible. The horse was still alive. The beast had landed on a lower outcropping of rock, a ledge barely wide enough to hold its trembling body. It stood there, chest heaving, sides slick with sweat and dust. Its hooves scraped the stone, muscles tensed, its eyes still wide with terror but burning with something else, defiance. Boone clenched his jaw, watching the creature struggle to stay upright. He had seen men break under less. This animal was still fighting. For the first time in years, Boone felt something stir deep within him. A question, unspoken, gnawing at the edges of his carefully constructed indifference. He had orchestrated this death sentence. He had played God over this creature's fate, and yet it had survived. Not by his hand, but despite it. That did not sit well with him. Boone Lancaster did not lose control. A gust of wind swept through the canyon, clearing the dust, revealing the full gravity of the situation. The horse was stranded. One wrong move, one misstep, and it would plummet to its true death. Boone exhaled, long and slow, rolling his cigar between his fingers. He could walk away now. Pretend none of this had happened. The outcome would be the same. Eventually, the ledge would give. The canyon would claim what it was owed. And yet, his feet did not move. Boone Lancaster had never been a man to second-guess himself. His decisions were final, his will unshakable. Yet, as he stood at the edge of the precipice, staring down at the horse clinging to life on that narrow ledge, something gnawed at him. The beast should have been dead. It was supposed to be dead. And yet, against all logic, against the very laws of nature, it had defied its fate. Boone let out a slow breath, watching the animal's chest rise and fall, its legs trembling but holding firm. It was a fighter. He turned away sharply, shaking off the thought. This wasn't his problem anymore. He had done what needed to be done. The canyon would finish the job, and by the time the sun set, there would be nothing left but silence. Boone took a step back, brushing the dust from his linen suit, ready to put the entire thing behind him. But then, another sound. Not the panicked whinny of an animal in distress. Not the desperate thrashing of a creature on the verge of death. No, it was something else entirely. The horse stomped a hoof against the stone. Once. Twice. A sharp, deliberate sound, like a challenge thrown into the wind. Boone hesitated, his fingers tightening around the cigar between them. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see the beast still standing tall, its ears pinned back, its eyes locked onto him. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't begging for help. It was daring him to leave. Boone clenched his jaw. He didn't believe in omens, didn't put stock in fate or destiny. The world was built on power, those who had it and those who didn't. And yet, something about the way that animal refused to submit struck a nerve deep within him. It reminded him of something. Or someone. His thoughts flickered to memories he had buried long ago, to a past he had spent decades trying to erase. A gust of wind whipped through the canyon, carrying with it the weight of something Boone couldn't quite name. He turned fully now, staring down at the ledge, at the impossible survivor beneath him. He hated that it was still alive. Hated that it was forcing him to care. But most of all, he hated that he couldn't walk away. With a slow exhale, Boone flicked the half-burned cigar from his fingers, watching as it tumbled into the abyss below. Then, without another word, he crouched at the cliff's edge, eyes scanning the rock face, searching for a way down. Boone Lancaster had spent his life towering above others, above problems, above consequences. He was the one who pulled the strings, who decided who rose and who fell. But now, as he crouched at the edge of the canyon, staring down at the animal he had condemned, he felt something unfamiliar slither into his chest. Hesitation. He had no reason to climb down there. No logical explanation for why his hands were already searching for stable rock, why his polished boots were scuffing against the uneven edge as he tested the descent. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying grains of dust that stung his face as he exhaled sharply. He could still turn back. He could leave the animal to its fate and walk away as he always had. But something inside him had shifted, something small but relentless, like a splinter buried too deep to ignore. Gritting his teeth, Boone tightened his grip on the rock and began his descent. The first few feet were easy, his strong hands finding natural holds in the jagged stone. But as he lowered himself further, the canyon walls became slick with loose sand, the cracks thinner, the distance between footholds greater. His breath grew shallow, controlled, his muscles burning with effort. He hadn't done something this reckless in years. Hell, maybe ever. The weight of his own arrogance pressed against him now. He had sent that horse to die without a second thought, and now he was risking his own life for it. A sudden crack echoed through the air. Boone froze. The rock beneath his hand crumbled, disintegrating into a cloud of dust as his body jolted downward. His fingers scrambled for another grip, his boot slipping dangerously close to the empty air below. For a moment, his heart slammed against his ribs, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. A reminder that he, too, was just flesh and bone, just another body gravity would claim without hesitation. With a sharp grunt, he found another hold, his knuckles white as he steadied himself. He couldn't fall. Not now. Not like this. Gritting his teeth, Boone forced himself to continue, his movements slower, more deliberate. When he finally reached the ledge, his breath was ragged, his suit streaked with dust, his fingers raw from the climb. He turned his gaze to the horse. It was still there, waiting, watching him with the same piercing intensity. It hadn't moved, hadn't panicked. It had simply waited, as if it knew Boone would come, as if it had always known. Boone exhaled, dragging a hand through his disheveled hair. He had made it, but now came the real question. He could climb down, but could he bring the horse back up? Boone Lancaster stood on the narrow ledge, his boots inches from the abyss. The canyon stretched endlessly below him, a graveyard of jagged rocks waiting for one wrong move. His breath was still heavy from the climb, his muscles aching in ways he hadn't felt in years. But none of that mattered now. Not as he turned to face the creature that had somehow dragged him into this mess. The horse stood still, its sides heaving, its coat streaked with sweat and dust. It wasn't afraid anymore. It just watched him, steady, unblinking, as if daring him to figure out what came next. Boone swallowed hard, running a hand down his dust-covered suit. He had no plan. He had acted on instinct, something he despised. His life had been built on logic, control, cold calculation. But now, standing face to face with the very thing he had tried to kill, he realized he had put himself in a situation with no easy way out. The ledge was too narrow, the climb too steep. Getting himself down had been a miracle. Getting the horse back up? That was damn near impossible. The animal shifted slightly, its hooves scraping the stone. Boone tensed. If it panicked, if it made the wrong move, the ledge would give. They would both fall. Slowly, cautiously, he raised a hand, his voice low, rough. Easy now. The words felt foreign in his mouth. He wasn't the kind of man who soothed things. He commanded, he ordered. But this wasn't a boardroom, and this horse didn't care about his money or his power. Boone took another step forward. The horse flinched, its ears flicking back. It didn't trust him. Why would it? He had been the one to leave it for dead. Boone clenched his jaw. This was insane. He should have left. Should have let nature take its course. But something deep in his gut told him that if he walked away now, if he abandoned the horse a second time, he would never be able to shake the feeling that he had lost something important. Something that had nothing to do with the animal, and everything to do with himself. He glanced up at the canyon's edge, measuring the distance. If he could rig something, maybe a makeshift harness, using what was left of the ropes, it might be possible. Barely. But the horse would have to trust him first. Boone took another step, this time slower, his voice calm but firm. You want to live, don't you? He wasn't sure if he was talking to the horse or to himself. The animal blinked, its muscles still tense but its stance shifting ever so slightly. It was listening. Boone knew that look. He had seen it in men before. Fighters, survivors. This horse had the same fire in its eyes that he had once had. The same fire he thought he had lost long ago. And for the first time in his life, Boone Lancaster realized this wasn't about saving the horse. This was about saving himself. Boone Lancaster had built his life on the backs of men who feared him. He was the kind of man people obeyed without question, The kind who never had to plead, never had to earn trust. He simply took what he wanted. But here, on the narrow ledge of death, none of that power meant a damn thing. The only way out of this was convincing a half-wild horse to trust him, to let him do what no one else ever had, save it. And Boone wasn't sure he knew how. He crouched slowly, keeping his movements measured. The horse's ears twitched, its muscles rippling under its dusty coat, ready to bolt if it had anywhere to go. But it didn't. Just like Boone, it was trapped, cornered by a fate neither of them had expected. He unfastened his belt, looping it in his hands, testing the strength of the leather. It wasn't much, but if he could create a makeshift halter, maybe, just maybe, he could guide the animal up. "All right, boy," Boone murmured, his voice low, steady. "We're getting out of here. But you're gonna have to trust me." The horse huffed, stamping a hoof. Boone knew the look in its eyes. It was the same look he had given every man who had ever tried to control him. Defiance. A refusal to be owned, to be broken. Boone exhaled, rubbing his jaw. He couldn't force this. He had spent his life taking, manipulating, bending the world to his will. But trust was something that had to be given. He loosened his posture, lowering his hands, showing he meant no harm. "You don't want to die. Neither do I. So let's figure this out together." The wind howled through the canyon, dust swirling between them. Boone held his breath as the horse hesitated. A moment stretched between them, an unspoken understanding settling into the space where fear had once lived. Then, slowly, the horse dipped its head, just slightly, just enough. Boone moved carefully, slipping the belt around its neck, securing it with a grip that was firm but not cruel. The horse tensed, but it didn't pull away. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A sliver of trust. Boone tightened his grip, testing the strength of his makeshift lead. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. He turned his gaze upward, toward the impossible climb ahead. The rocks were unstable, the ledge narrow. One wrong move and it would all be over. But Boone had already made his choice. He wasn't leaving this horse behind. With a steadying breath, he gave the lead a gentle tug. "Come on, boy," he said, his voice edged with something unfamiliar. "Hope. Let's get the hell out of here." Boone Lancaster had made impossible deals, crushed rivals, and built an empire on sheer willpower. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. As he gripped the makeshift lead, staring up at the jagged rock face they had to climb, he felt something foreign creeping into his chest. Doubt. The climb alone had nearly killed him on the way down. Now, he had to do it again, only this time, with a 1,000-pound animal depending on him. The horse snorted, its body tense, ears flicking as if sensing Boone's hesitation. It was waiting for him to decide. Waiting for him to prove whether this was real. Whether Boone Lancaster, a man who had never lifted a finger for anyone but himself, was truly going to see this through. Boone exhaled sharply. There was no time for second-guessing. He tested his grip on the belt wrapped around the horse's neck, then reached for the old ropes still anchored to the cliff above. If they held, he might have a chance. With careful movements, he tugged on the rope, making sure it wasn't frayed beyond use. It groaned under his weight but didn't snap. Good enough. He turned back to the horse. "All right, boy," he muttered. "No sudden moves. Just follow me, step by step." He pulled gently on the lead. The horse hesitated, muscles coiled like springs. Boone could see the fear in its dark eyes. It didn't trust him, not fully, but it wanted to live. That was something they had in common. The first step was the hardest. Boone climbed up onto a narrow foothold, pressing himself against the canyon wall. He gave another soft pull on the belt. For a moment, the horse resisted. Then, with a deep breath that almost sounded human, it lifted one hoof, then another, scrambling onto a higher part of the ledge. Boone's grip tightened. The rocks beneath them were loose. If the horse panicked, if it slipped, it would be over. Boone clenched his jaw. "Easy," he murmured, more to himself than to the animal. "We take this slow." Every movement was a battle. The climb was steep, the heat suffocating. Boone's arms burned from gripping the rope, his body straining under the effort. The horse followed, trusting him just enough to move when he moved, stop when he stopped. But the higher they climbed, the more the ledge crumbled beneath them. Boone could hear the shifting rock, feel the canyon fighting to take them back. Then, just as they reached the halfway point, a deep crack echoed through the gorge. Boone's heart slammed against his ribs. He barely had time to react before the ground beneath the horse gave way. For a split second, everything hung in terrifying stillness. Then, the ledge collapsed entirely, and the horse lurched downward, the weight of its body yanking Boone violently toward the abyss. The moment the ledge gave way, Boone Lancaster felt the full weight of the horse yank him downward. The belt in his grip burned against his palms as his feet lost their hold, his body dragged dangerously close to the edge. For a split second, he saw nothing but open sky and the jagged rocks waiting far below. His instincts screamed at him to let go, to save himself. But his grip only tightened. The horse kicked wildly, its body swinging over the abyss, hooves scraping against the crumbling rock face. The makeshift lead strained between them, and Boone felt every muscle in his arms threatening to give out. His own survival instincts battled against something deeper, something stronger. He had come this far. He couldn't let the animal fall now. With a guttural roar, he twisted his body, planting his boot against a jutting rock, using every ounce of strength to stop their descent. For a terrifying moment, nothing held. The weight was too much. The rock under Boone's foot crumbled, his hands slick with sweat, the rope biting into his skin. His vision blurred with the effort, his breath ragged. Then, miraculously, the horse's flailing hooves found solid ground. It wasn't much, just a sliver of rock jutting out from the cliffside, but it was enough. The animal trembled, muscles quivering, but it had stopped falling. They were still alive. Boone let out a sharp breath, his chest heaving. His arms screamed in protest, but he didn't loosen his grip. "Hold on, boy," he rasped, his voice rough from strain. He had to think. He had to act fast. The ledge wouldn't hold forever, and his strength was fading. The rope, the horse, the crumbling rock, it was all a ticking clock. He scanned the cliffside, searching for anything, any way to climb the rest of the way up. Above them, the remaining rope dangled, still anchored to the top of the canyon. If he could just reach it, if he could somehow secure the horse, there was a chance. "All right," Boone muttered, mostly to himself. One last move. He adjusted his grip, shifting his position. This was it. Do or die. With a final burst of determination, he braced himself, wrapping the lead around his arm for leverage. Then, gritting his teeth, he pulled, one last desperate effort to bring them both back from the brink. The horse let out a strained whinny, its legs scrambling, muscles tensing as it fought to follow his lead. The ground beneath them groaned in protest. Boone's vision blurred, his body screaming for relief. And then, suddenly, the weight shifted. The horse was moving. But they weren't safe yet. The hardest part was still to come. Boone Lancaster had never been this close to the edge, physically or metaphorically. His entire body screamed in protest, his muscles shaking from exhaustion, but he refused to let go. The horse, still breathing hard, stood just above him, its legs trembling but stable. The hard part was over. Or so he thought. As he tried to shift his weight and pull himself higher, a sharp pain shot through his arms. His grip faltered for the first time, his fingers threatening to slip from the rock. Panic surged through him, a foreign, unwelcome sensation. Boone had always been the one in control, the man who never showed weakness. But now, dangling off a crumbling ledge, with nothing but sheer willpower keeping him from falling. He was terrifyingly aware of his own mortality. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. The top of the canyon wasn't far, but his strength was running out fast. His pulse pounded in his ears, each second stretching unbearably long. He had risked everything to save the damn horse. Was he really about to lose himself in the process? Above him, the horse shifted, its ears flicking forward as it stared down at him. Boone met its gaze, something unspoken passing between them. The same animal he had condemned to die was now watching him struggle for his own life. A bitter laugh bubbled in Boone's throat, but it came out as a strained breath. "Looks like we're even now, huh?" he muttered. The horse huffed, stamping a hoof. Boone had no idea if it understood him, but at that moment he wasn't sure it mattered. The wind howled around them, stirring dust and loose pebbles that tumbled over the edge. His time was running out. He needed a miracle. With the last reserves of his strength, Boone reached for the rope still dangling from the top of the canyon. His fingers brushed against it, but the slickness of sweat and blood on his palms made it nearly impossible to grip. His vision swam. His muscles burned. He couldn't. Then, something unexpected happened. The horse moved. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped closer, lowering its massive head just enough. Boone barely registered what was happening at first. But then, through the haze of exhaustion, he understood. The horse was offering him something to hold onto. His throat tightened. He had spent his life believing power was taken, not given. That trust was a weakness, not a choice. And yet, here he was, at the mercy of an animal he had tried to destroy. Swallowing hard, Boone made his decision. He reached up, fingers tangling in the horse's thick mane. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he pulled. Boone Lancaster had never relied on anyone but himself. His entire life had been a ruthless climb, a battle where trust was a liability and mercy was weakness. But now, dangling above the abyss, his grip slipping, it wasn't power or wealth that would save him. It was the very creature he had tried to kill. The horse stood firm, its dark eyes locked onto his, its breath heavy but steady. Boone clenched his teeth, his pride screaming against what he was about to do. But he had no choice. He tightened his grip on the horse's mane, and let it save him. With one last burst of strength, he pulled himself upward, his legs scrambling for a foothold. The horse didn't flinch. It held its ground, muscles coiled, standing like a pillar against the wind. Boone grunted, every muscle in his body burning as he climbed higher. His free hand grasped for the rope still dangling from above, and this time he caught it. His fingers locked around the coarse fibers, his heart hammering in his chest as he finally hoisted himself onto solid ground. For a moment, he just lay there, his chest heaving, his body coated in dust and sweat. The wind whipped past him, cold against his burning skin. He was alive. Against all odds, against every mistake he had made, he was alive. Slowly, he turned his head, his gaze finding the horse standing beside him, its ears flicking forward as it watched him carefully. There was no fear in its eyes, no anger, just a quiet understanding, as if it had always known this was how it would end. Boone exhaled a shaky breath and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Guess you win, huh?" The horse simply snorted, shaking its mane, as if unimpressed by the entire ordeal. Boone sat up, rubbing his aching hands. He should have felt relief. Should have been eager to walk away, leave this place behind. But something in him had shifted, something he couldn't ignore. He had spent his life thinking strength meant standing alone, that power meant controlling everything and everyone around him. But here, in the silence of the canyon, he had learned the truth. Real strength wasn't in domination. It was in resilience, in survival, in trust. Boone pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady but firm. The horse remained beside him, waiting, as if it had no intention of leaving without him. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had come here expecting to walk away from a life. Instead, he was walking away with one. "Come on, boy," he murmured, placing a hand on the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of something alive, something real, beneath his palm. "Let's go home." Together, they turned toward the horizon, leaving the canyon behind.